All right, I usually don't have guests on my fledgling little YouTube channel, but in this case, I'm happy to have a friend and nemesis from some years back, John. John is known online as Counter Apologist, and I decided to invite him on my obscure channel because last week he posted an interesting article, blog post, and in fact, it was a text, the textual content of a YouTube video that he had posted, which I will put a link to in the comments below, in the description below. And so I thought it'd be interesting just to invite him on and have him share his piece, and we could have it out together. So John, welcome to my as yet, I think it's unnamed podcast. I guess they're, or not podcast, YouTube channel, say the Randall Rouser YouTube channel. Welcome. And first of all, what did you write and why did I invite you on? Oh, actually, before we get to that, where can people find you? I know we usually do that at the end, but let's do it now so we don't forget to do it. Where can people find you online and hear and learn more about you and your thoughts?
So I'm on YouTube as Counter Apologist. I have a blog at counterapologist.blogspot.com. Any videos I post will have the script posted on the blog so people can read it if they don't want to watch a video. I'm also on Twitter at Counter Apologist. Couldn't fit the T.
I've wondered about that. So is that it's too long?
It's too long. Maybe when I signed up, it was too long. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Excellent. So what did you say? What did you say about me and why are we here?
So you wrote this cool book, Jesus Loves Canaanites, and it was a much more in-depth take on your defense that you've presented in other texts and on your website of not even a defense, just a way a Christian can read the biblical atrocities in the Old Testament, the slaughter of the genocide of the Canaanites. And you do a very good job articulating why it's a genocide and why the traditional Christian approach of minimizing its moral impact doesn't work and is actually counterproductive to the evangelical goal, I think. And in your defense, you made a move in terms of saying what Christians should not interpret what is portrayed as a divine command of Yahweh to commit genocide and literally put broadswords into babies. It should not be interpreted that way because God is all loving and God is perfect. And so we should take God's intention in the passage to be something very different because God can't command an evil act. He can't command a genocide. And so the human author of the Bible probably had a different meaning, and we as Christians should interpret it that way. And I think that move, while logically valid, there's no contradiction, causes a problem for Reformed epistemology, which is a very famous thing created by Alvin Plantinga that you are a capable defender of. And I think the problem with that is one of Alvin Plantinga's objections he deals with came from atheist philosopher Michael Moore. And it was
Michael Martin, isn't it?
Michael Martin. Thank you.
Yeah.
Michael Moore's a very bad, not good person. Michael Martin.
Oh, he's got some good documentaries and some not so good ones.
It's propaganda, even if I agree with his conclusions. Anyway, the objection was the son of the great pumpkin objection. And so the charge was that Reformed epistemology leads into full-blown epistemic relativism in such that community groups can come up with their own logically coherent, properly basic beliefs. And unless you can criticize it from the outside as finding some kind of logical contradiction, there's no way to undermine that. And Plantinga's response to the son of the great pumpkin objection was to say that beliefs have defeaters, that properly basic beliefs could face a defeater and that they would no longer be properly basic. And so the example of the great pumpkin is the prediction was that the great pumpkin will manifest in a pumpkin patch every Halloween. And so after repeated years of the great pumpkin not manifesting, it would serve as a defeater for the Great Pumpkin belief. And my objection is that the moves you make in the book and then in other parts of your apologetic basically undermine the ability and reframe objections to Christianity or theism in terms that literally cannot be falsified. So there's just no way to have a defeater. And when you do that, I think you undermine the Reformed epistemology that you underwrite your apologetic with. And so you become susceptible again to the son of the Great Pumpkin objection. At least that's hopefully a good summary of my argument.
All right, thank you. I think you probably went fast for some people, but it's a good summary of, and we can go back, of course, we're going to go back over the terrain. So some people, you lost them. I mean, people who are familiar with the conversations, you didn't lose for sure. Other people that are not, yeah, you may have lost them, but that's the whole point, is to give a quick overview and then to kind of go back over it. So I found it very helpful. I would push back to start with some of the descriptions. So for example, you said, well, God would not command X, so the human author meant something other than X. The human author didn't mean to attribute these actions to God. That, in fact, is not the position I take in the book. The position I take in the book is what I call the two authors principle, that yes, the human author can disagree with the divine author. And where the human author does, then the divine author is, not surprisingly, the significant, important voice that we want to, the message that we want to take out of the text.
Yeah.
So to use an analogy, and I use a lot of literary analogies because I come from an English background and we are dealing with a literary text here. So one of the analogies is a collection of documents that are gathered by an editor from different sources. They all say different things. The editor can put those collected works into a new work. And so those are all different authorial voices in the original works. Now they're edited into a new work. And this new editor has gathered those writings and can intend to say something different through those writings than was intended by the original authors. And analogously, God can appropriate descriptions of God's actions, which at points may be false. But if God does so, then when God appropriates those words to use them in a different way than was intended by the original human author. And in those cases, you take God's word as the meaning for us rather than the human word. So it's not an unimportant distinction, I think, to make at that point.
I agree completely. I kind of went too fast over that, and I agree completely with your summary. I did not mean to misrepresent that.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I'll just say quickly, I don't see any problem in what you've stated, but in terms of the allegation of falsification, of alleged epistemic relativism, I don't think falsification is a big deal, because I think that it's just true of any belief system that you can always revise it in light of incoming data in perpetuity. But I want to set that aside for the moment, and I want to just kind of focus in on the whole topic of Reformed epistemology that you've raised, because it's interesting to note that in the book I never reference Reformed epistemology at all, and the reason I don't is because it doesn't actually play any role in the book. What does play a role in the book is moderate foundationalist and particularist approach to epistemology. So if I'll just briefly say what I mean by that, a particularist approach to epistemology is different than a Methodist approach. A Methodist approach says, in principle, we begin with what we can know and rationally believe in terms of a theory. So for example, in order for us to know something, it has to either be certain or it has to be derived or inferred from something which is certain. So that's one very rigorous Methodist approach to epistemology. And then you measure up all your potential beliefs and see whether they can meet that very lofty standard. That's not the approach I take in the book. I think that's a failed approach, actually. So the approach I take in the book is called a particularist approach, where you begin with what you accept prima facie as paradigm instances of knowledge and of rational belief. And among those, I argue, are moral beliefs. Beliefs such as that it is wrong to participate in genocide, or it's wrong to kill innocent non-combatants in wartime. And if you begin with that and that you have moral knowledge about those truths, then you reason from that moral knowledge. So it doesn't appeal to Plantinga or to Reformed epistemology at all.
Certainly, I was not. I didn't intend for my case to seem like you were based. The book was necessarily based on this epistemology. It's more that you defend it. It is particularly popular among Christian apologists. I mean, Alvin Plantinga got a $10 million award from the Templeton Foundation for Reformed epistemology. It was, I mean, it's been lauded by Christian apologists and philosophers for decades now. So, and I know you do subscribe to it, at least in a number of your published works. So I think the critique was more going against Reformed epistemology based on the moves that you made in the book, which kind of made me, when you made the moves in the book, it kind of connected the dots to other issues with perfect being theology and biblical inerrancy, and then going back to the son of the great pumpkin objection. So I'm not inherently, like, honestly, you have the best reading of the Canaanite genocides. I think it is the best apologetic, the best approach a Christian could give to the problem. And I think an answer to that as an atheist is, I mean, I don't believe in God, so I don't think your reading is valid. And I think the Old Testament atrocities are good, very good evidence against the truth of Christianity. And so the answer is in trying to, I don't even want to say I want to counter it. I kind of wish, I'm not going to get rid of all Christians. I kind of wish more Christians took your view, frankly. But I think a problem is that if you take your view and these other approaches to problems in Christianity, specifically in some in theism, you undermine the Reformed epistemology that modern contemporary apologetics is largely based on. I mean, this is pretty, I mean, other than the Thomists and the Catholics, I think, in Protestant theology, Alvin Plantinga's Reformed epistemology is very prolific. It seems widely accepted.
Yeah, well, it's certainly in apologetic method, I wouldn't say it's a dominant view. It is popular, but classical apologetic views and evidentialist views and cumulative case views, I think, are still very popular as well.
Yeah, they do that, but I think they underwrite it, right? So like the famous quote was that Craig puts it such that there's a double warrant. There's like the evidentialist case that they can make, and even if you think that didn't work, they're still justified under Reformed epistemology, that sort of thing. And that's, lots of people parrot Craig, but yeah, you get, I mean, so the idea was to attack that epistemology. That's really kind of what I'm going at.
Well, let's just pursue this from this angle for a minute. What epistemology do you think people should adopt?
I'm not endorsing a specific epistemology right now. I definitely think that some form of idea of like I don't want to say classical foundationalism, because I think Plantinga had good criticisms of like the classical foundationalism, but there will be something like a properly basic belief that everybody's going to take. You have to have some kind of foundationalism, or you're going to have accept a circular justification or an infinite regress, right? So I don't want to, or I even think need to endorse an epistemology. I am showing an internal problem with Reformed epistemologists who will pursue your apologetic approach.
So yeah, like I mean, it's sort of like the idea of if you're going to curse the darkness, you should light a candle. So it's like
atheists don't have moral obligations, Randall.
Yeah, well, I think of course they do, but I know, I'm just thinking, like, if a person does critique one view of epistemology, they do it presumably from a position of where they believe that they have rational justification to even make the argument. And if you have rational justification to make the argument, I assume that you're doing so from a background framework of understanding as to what rational belief is and how we determine that, what knowledge looks like. So I'm just wondering, what is your background position from which you're launching the criticism at Reformed epistemology?
I mean, I don't really subscribe to a specific one so much. Like I said, this was more of an internal critique. I still think of a foundationalist. I don't accept a circular circular or infinite regress justification. I just don't start from a presupposition, not that you're presuppositional apologetics, but the presupposition that God exists and that Christianity is true.
So how about this? So one of the issues, of course, for Reformed epistemology, which again doesn't figure into the book at all and actually plays a very minimal role in anything I do, but that's to propose that if Christianity is true, then something like a sensus divinitatis exists. So this is some sort of immediate intuitive way to sense knowledge of God's existence. And so you could form beliefs about God in an immediate way apart from argument, although in principle vulnerable to defeaters by way of the sensus divinitatis. So for example, you could be in a room and then you suddenly sense God's presence there and you form the immediate belief, I sense God's presence here, and you're justified or warranted in that belief. However, the defeater could come, an undercutting defeater in this case, because a person could say, yeah, but right at the moment that you form that belief in God's presence in the room, this gas was filtering into the room, which tends to form delusional beliefs about supernatural beings and people. That would now provide an undercutting defeater for your warrant. And so in that particular case, you may not be justified apart from evidence in just believing in God's presence anymore, but there could be other cases where you could have this sensus divinitatis working. So that's Plantinga's argument. Now, you seem to be still sympathetic with a foundationalist approach. So you can have someone like James Sennett, who argued for a universal sanction criterion. In other words, that one basis for one, you would take a Methodist threshold in this point. Remember, I distinguish Methodism from particularism. You could take a Methodist threshold or criterion, I should say, and say, well, in order to justify or identify what properly basic beliefs are, they have to be beliefs that are formed by universally over the human population. Beliefs in God are not in that way, so they would not meet that criterion, and so a sensus divinitatis wouldn't be warranted in a properly basic way. But sense perception in normally functioning human beings is, auditory perception, memory, testimonial belief. So you could begin to identify properly basic beliefs in that way. Would that work for you? A universal sanction criterion?
I mean, sure. I mean, I'm willing to go with it. Although I didn't really come to defend a particular approach. I'm good to, I think, to work with that. One thing that's important for me to bring up in the particulars of my argument is that I could even be sympathetic to the point where I would grant a sensus divinitatis says God exists, but Alvin, if I may be so informal, uses Reformed epistemology to say Christianity is true and the Bible is speaking to me, and he goes much, much further than theism. He goes straight to Christianity, and even I think the report I thought I read, he used it to justify kinds of inerrancy as well as properly basic. I'm not.
Well, he uses it to what he calls the great things of the gospel.
Okay. Well, my argument would go in so far. I would be good even saying that, oh, well, God, you believe God exists, but this is a defeater. For Christianity should have a defeater, right? Or I think it would apply to the God belief, but at a minimum, attacking Christianity in specific would be the first goal. And then I think it's a little bit of a weaker case when you want to go against theism because of how easily abstracted theism as a concept gets. And that's like the conceptual non-falsifiability of like perfect being theology, right? I think one of the things that kind of gets lost in this is like I have the sensus divinitatis, I sense God's presence, God exists. What is God? Oh, is this disembodied mind, he's powerful, he's good, whatever. People who have that, especially when you feel, it's supposed to be like sense perception. I significantly doubt people have this immediate sense of the necessary being that has the maximal of composite or compossible great making properties, right? They're not getting that hard, unfalsifiable conceptual thought of God, right? They just sense this spirit exists And then when they get into theology and objections are raised, then you get to this very defensible concept of God that just can't be falsified, because it baked into this definition, you can't show any logical contradictions in it.
Well, okay, we should. So first of all, sensus divinitatis does tend to function for a more minimal theism. It'd be the kind of thing that you would find described in Romans 1 and Romans 2. So like knowledge of God's existence, some basic grasp of his nature. The great things of the gospel can also be known on Plantinga's view in a properly basic way, but that would be through the eternal instigation of the Holy Spirit. So the Holy Spirit, an agent acting upon a person rather than them having a cognitive faculty and just immediately deriving the information. But it's sort of like a testimonial witness, you could almost say, from the Spirit. And I mean, Plantinga's point is if Christianity is true, then something like this is probably true. And I think he's correct. So on that ground, I don't think that a Christian is obliged to adopt a non-Christian epistemology from a Christian perspective. It's the same thing, just to kind of go from Plantinga, the discussion about Plantinga, over to Jesus Loves Canaanites and reading the Bible. There isn't any neutral approach to the Bible. So there is the position of the person who says this is just a collection of human writings and nothing more. And then there's an interpretation that says this is a collection of human writings, and it was gathered or superintended through divine intentional processes. And that divine mind that gathered them has a unique authorial voice throughout the work that unifies it and testifies to Jesus. So those are two different interpretations of the Bible. Neither one is neutral. And I think each one of those readers is justified prima facie in engaging with the biblical text in accord with their presuppositions and addressing defeaters as they arise, as I sought to do in the book. So do you not see that to be the case, that you and me can approach the Bible from different starting points and reasonably seek to read it consistent with our beliefs about it?
So when you say, I mean, obviously, everybody's going to read the text and they're going to interpret it in a way consistent with their, what they have going in. I think, obviously, like this notion of true objectivity or being completely unbiased is not attainable for us. We're just emotional beings. We have our biases. But to say you couldn't be a agnostic and you come at the text and you go, Christians say this is the work of a tri-omni God, I don't know. I'm going to investigate and read this book cover to cover. And I think you would read this and you would get to the Canaanite genocide and the slavery of the Old Testament, and you would go, nope, this is not the work of a perfect being. And I'm not going to say that like I said, your view is logically coherent. There's not to say you couldn't do this. It is to say that if you do this and take the other apologetic stances, then if you hold to Reformed epistemology, then Reformed epistemology is going to reduce to a full-blown epistemic relativism, such that even things like belief in the great pumpkin as properly basic would be justified on Reformed epistemology. And that, I think, is a problem. I mean, it's supposed to be the defeater. Plantinga responded to the defeater or the objection by pointing out that properly basic beliefs should have defeaters, and now that's gone.
That's not okay. That's really not the only thing. With Plantinga is not just pointing out that there are defeaters. He's pointing out, I mean, in principle, there could be a belief community that does interpret reality by way of a great pumpkin. Just like there can be people who believe everything is natural, right? There are actually people that call themselves naturalists. There are people who call themselves humanists. They believe that human beings are the normative standard of value by which said human beings ought to seek to self-actualize and live together in community. There are all sorts of belief systems in communities, and each one of them, yeah, you start off prima facie with your basic assumptions about reality. It seems to me that's just like a reality, that's just a fact. So I don't think anything in quote unquote relativism, any vicious relativism follows from that. All that follows from that is the neutral observation of epistemic plurality, that people have various different worldviews.
So when I read through parts of Plantinga's work and in the defenses and counter examples, the Great Pumpkin objection and this son of the Great Pumpkin objection is taken to be a strong objection that Plantinga takes a lot of time to deal with, and his answer depended upon defeaters. And to the bad outcome he's trying to avoid is to have to say that on Reformed epistemology, the belief in the Great Pumpkin could be as properly basic as belief in the Christian God. And it seems that, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seems like, well, yes, it could be. But that seems to be exactly what he's trying to avoid in his arguments against that.
No, like, I mean, Plantinga talks about this again in War and a Christian Belief. He talks about the possibility that you could develop a model like his for other belief systems like Islam or Mormonism and so on.
Yes.
Nothing significant follows from that. All that follows from that is that different people with different belief systems interpret reality in accord with the belief systems they hold, which they should be doing. And then at some point, I mean, this comes to the issue of falsification. At some point, Lionel keeps showing up and waiting for the Great Pumpkin to show up, and the Great Pumpkin never shows up. He can continue on that forever in perpetuity if he wants to. But at some point, most people are just going to kind of wander away, which shows that it's not that the belief systems get falsified, because you can always modify the belief system to reconcile it with prima facie disconfirming data. So instead, what happens is it simply gets to the point where it's no longer worth keeping on the road, as it were. So just to use an automotive analogy, which I actually give in the book when I'm talking about this, that you can fix a car in principle over and over again when anything breaks and keep it on the road in perpetuity. The point is that eventually it's not that the car breaks in a way that it can't be fixed unless it's literally nuked and vaporized, but rather it just gets to a point where it's not worth fixing anymore. And so it's the same thing with falsification. Rather than think in terms of falsification, we should just think of belief systems eventually getting to the point where most people are no longer inclined to defend them.
Sure. And, I can agree in a lot of ways. And I think your arguments and our exchanges over the years have kind of led me to that path. And I think that brings me to the point, because in the work, the Plantinga pointed to defeaters, right? And it was like you said, he said people can use Reformed epistemology to defend Islam, Mormonism, Hinduism, etc. But he tried to make some kind of an attempt at a criteria where like things like voodoo and other beliefs would not be justified, things like the Great Pumpkin. And so to say, well, actually, the Great Pumpkin would be justified as properly basic on his view, I think becomes a problem. Like he specifically tried to avoid that conclusion. Like it's called the Great Pumpkin objection for a reason. It's an objection, and he tries to answer it. And I think once you correctly come to your view that you could have the Mustang of Thesis, we can keep replacing parts over and over again, and to keep a Mustang with at the end is completely different than the original one that rolled off the factory. Yeah, that could be done, but then that undermines Plantinga's defense of his own epistemology. And so I'm willing to walk with you to this brave new world, but then I think you are going to have a problem if you do use Reformed epistemology to say belief in God is properly basic. Well, then people like me come around and go, belief in the Great Pumpkin is properly basic.
But it's not. You're when you speak like that, you say in an abstract way is properly basic. No. Could be in principle relative to some doxastic community that held a particular set of beliefs. In fact, there is no doxastic community in reality that holds beliefs in a Great Pumpkin, right? This was part of a Peanuts cartoon.
Yeah.
Could there be in principle? Yeah, I mean, it's in principle possible that there could be all sorts of belief systems by which one interprets reality. So in the same way, like right now, there's this big debate over the interpretation of unexplained aerial phenomena, or previously known as UFOs. And whether the evidence in fact warrants these being interpreted as alien intelligences visiting Earth, whether it could be some unknown human technology, whether it could be something else. I was talking with a theologian last week who said he thinks it could be demonic. Now, when he says that, he's saying that from a Christian worldview perspective. He believes there are spiritual agencies that are so non-human intelligences, which are non-physical in nature, but which interact with human beings. And he has that category when he interprets those. Someone who's a naturalist doesn't think that there are demonic agencies, but they may in principle be open to alien intelligences. And so they would look for that explanation. Somebody else, let's say a biologist who has really grappled with the inexplicable, the very low statistical chance for life to arise spontaneously anywhere in the universe. And that biologist may be very skeptical about any alien intelligence for that reason, and thus always look for some other explanation. Each one of those people, they're looking at that same datum, and they're interpreting it differently in light of their worldview. And the evidence can mount for one or another one of these hypotheses, and then the other groups are going to have to reconcile that with their belief system. But I mean, you're sort of talking as if, well, there's this one group of belief systems in principle that it could apply to and another that it couldn't. It seems to me that that's really sort of just reflecting a cultural prejudice about certain belief systems in principle that we're more familiar with, that seem more plausible prima facie and others less so. But if we just recognize in principle, people have different belief systems, unless you can give me sort of an objective rationality with a capital R description of what the range of legitimate ways of interpreting reality are, and then the range of illegitimate ones are in principle, I think that you're going to run into that difficulty.
So I agree with a lot of what you're saying there, and maybe even all of it, actually. I'm trying to think. I guess the main problem is, like you said, nobody really believes in the Great Pumpkin. And I even said in my critique that the main difference between Christianity and Great Pumpkinism is that there is no great swath of Great Pumpkin believers, and so Great Pumpkin theologians who will use equivalents to the metaphysics of transubstantiation to explain away that actually the Great Pumpkin does come back every Halloween to every pumpkin patch, because the substance changes, but the accidents does not, right? Yep. And you can always come up with this way to make it such that things can't be falsified. And yes, in principle, you can always do that, but at some point, and it is a very subjective thing, you kind of look at this and you go, I just don't buy it, right? I mean, like, that's when I guess you kind of make that decision to move on and finally buy a new car. And for me and a lot of other people, right, like you said, I think the reason you wrote the book is you've encountered a lot of apostates who have cited things like the Old Testament genocide as a catalyst for questioning their faith and ultimately apostatizing. And I think your approach, while logically valid, is, to me, it seems extravagant, I guess. It's just it's a long length to look at something in the text that seems particularly clear and say, this is how I keep it consistent with my belief in a perfectly loving God and a perfectly loving Jesus. And yes, you've done that. I agree. You've laid out your steps, your presuppositions, and your interpretive method. But that seems far less plausible to me than just, it's really just a bunch of stories, right? And granted, we have very different starting points, but are we stuck in this subjective world at this? I mean, it's literally irreconcilable. Like you said, nobody's given this capital R rational, capital O objective way of what beliefs are valid and not. But
although we are having a civil, informed, reasoned discussion across some big differences, so there's still certainly a lot of room. Yeah, some of the things I wanted to touch on then is, so I want to go back to your description. So you said, well, for you, it's just a bunch of stories. For me, it's something else. And then earlier, when you said something similar to that, you said, but if there could be this sort of agnostic who just kind of reads the text without either your sort of presupposition or mine, then they would read and they'd say, oh, okay, maybe this is the word of God or something, but then they would get to the Canaanite genocide and they'd say, nope, definitely not, right? And so it seemed to me, while you didn't explicitly say it, that you were trying to break the logjam, as it were, by proposing that there is some hypothetical neutral perspective. And if you had that neutral reader without any commitments, then they would read the text and then they would side with you automatically. The first thing I would want to just briefly throw out is that I would challenge the very idea that there is such a reader, that there is truly neutral. I think that we are all invested from a particular starting point. The second thing, though, is that I think that kind of approach misconstrues what's going on in the book and what I think happens when Christians read the Bible, because you do get from some Christian apologists, for sure, you get this idea that, well, if you just read the Bible objectively, then you can develop an argument that the Bible is the word of God. And then they go through arguments such as evidence for fulfilled prophecy or the unity of the text. And then they build this cumulative case argument, the historical reliability of the text. And all of this, you put it together and you can say the evidence supports objectively that the Bible is the word of God. And so that conclusion becomes a conclusion of an argument. That's not my approach, which again would be in keeping with the Reformed epistemology. I think we recognize rather that we come to the text through different interpretive starting points. I interpreted it differently than you because I'm a Christian, but I'm not arguing that my case depends upon persuading that quote unquote neutral individual. Rather, what I would want to say to that neutral individual, if there were such a person, is look at all the arguments I have for why I'm a Christian, and then why I interpret the Bible in light of all of those beliefs and arguments.
Sure. And I think, well, I have my own view on the variety of apologetic arguments for theism and Christianity in particular. And I think a true neutral, I think you get stuck in agnosticism, mostly because the sum output of these arguments from these very lofty metaphysical arguments is you kind of end up almost where you start off in terms of your intuitions. So if you start off as a true neutral, you're probably not going to come out with the conclusion that theism or atheism is true. That's just my own very pessimistic view of metaphysics. I think so. My point was like trying to break the logjam. Like I was like, if we take someone who doesn't have a lot of Christian or atheist baggage. So if we found a Buddhist somewhere in China, right, who hasn't heard really, they've been kind of in a epistemological community that's just kind of sheltered in Buddhism, and we try to teach them about atheism and monotheism and then Christianity in particular, and we talk about God is supposed to be the triomni being, and we say, here, read this book. Is this the output of a triomni God? I think when you get to the thing where it says God said kill the Canaanites and don't spare the women and children, they're gonna be like, all right, I'm out. I mean, just like I know you don't typically defend the old school moral argument, right? But when you say the premise is always objective moral values and duties exist, you kind of appeal to our emotional or moral intuitions, our own intuitions, which you use to justify in the book that genocide is wrong, right? Like I have good prima facie evidence in my moral version of genocide to think genocide is an evil act. Therefore, God can't command an evil act. So therefore, Yahweh didn't do this, right? But I think just reading the text, Yahweh commands it. The neutral Buddhist would say, okay, that can't be good because he has our shared moral revulsion to genocide. So that's kind of where I was trying to go with somebody who would be neutral in a way, right? So not necessarily an atheist or a theist, or at least a monotheist, right?
Yeah. So I mean, if that person's going to say, well, this isn't God at this point, what they're already doing, of course, is they're making that judgment from a particular interpretation of what the text is saying and what its purpose is. And I mean, I point out through a Christological reading of the text that we have good grounds to question that, and actually several other grounds, including archaeological and historical grounds, to question those assumptions about what the text is doing and what the purpose of the text is in the first place. So did you read I don't know if you read the whole book, but are you familiar with what I said about Stanley Kubrick?
Yes, I did read your portions on Kubrick. I didn't go over the parts where you justified that it was genocide. I was pretty well convinced.
Yeah. Okay, so I think for some people, maybe something like that is a nice, simple explanation. So if you were to, as I explain in the book, if you were to watch a typical movie, and you have what is called a continuity error in the film that appears. So for example, furniture that was present in one scene, and the very next scene it's missing, or persons wearing one particular type of clothing in one scene, and the next scene another type of clothing. And that's called the continuity error because it's an error in the storytelling. It's a break in the flow of the storytelling, and it's typically attributed to bad editing and to bad filmmaking. However, there are a lot of continuity errors in Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. And that person who just watches The Shining with no belief that it was made by this great filmmaker, Stanley Kubrick, would be justified, all things being equal, and saying, those are just continuity errors. There's nothing more going on there. It was a bad editor. But if you believe that a great filmmaker made this movie, you are now going to go back and take a second look. And in fact, you will begin to piece together through very careful study of the film some of the explanations as to what Kubrick is in fact doing. Now, one really well-known lay scholar, he's not an academic, but he does some really sophisticated analysis of The Shining on YouTube, named Rob Ager, has done some great analysis of The Shining, for example, and explains a lot of the anomalies in the film. And of course, this all just feeds into Kubrick's towering reputation as a filmmaker. So to say, well, yeah, but if somebody were neutral and they just watched The Shining, they would assume that there are continuity errors. That doesn't mean that that person's right. Maybe they should watch the film with the belief that Kubrick is the great director. And now when it comes to the Bible, it's the same issue. You say, well, it seems to me implausible to look for some other explanation as to what's going on in all this biblical violence. And my point is, yeah, but if you believe God is the primary divine editor / author of scripture, then you do have a good reason to go back and say something else is going on here that we may have missed at our first reading, just like with the continuity errors. So that you don't appreciate that point?
So I can sort of see that, but at the same time, if you were to read this, I mean, this is a topic with Kubrick and The Shining, that people think that some of it may have been intentional and some of it might not have been, and that he is human after all. And there are, while yes, he did do, like, I think The Shining has the record for the most number of takes for a single scene. It's like 120 something, right? The fact of the matter is he has to work with that it is, and he might not have caught it in the thing of all the takes, and he has to look at what he has on the editing floor and say, well, this thing has the continuity intact, but this scene had the better acting or the better delivery from this actor. I'm going to go with this. It's very minor. We move on. And there actually is a continuity error, but he had to make these sort of trade-offs between what he had and what he missed at the time, right? Do I think every single continuity error in The Shining is intentional? Absolutely not. I don't think that. I think he's still a good director. I don't think that I still think that little things get missed. And I think when you get to things like the genocide in the Bible, the slavery in the Bible, right? The early polytheism in the Bible, right? You get to these things and you go, this is a set of stories that evolved over time. And these people, and the historical interpretation was that they killed the kids and the women and they committed this genocide. And only in later times that slavery was justified, right? There are people to this day, the most popular Christian apologist probably of our time expressly defends the moral obligation of the Israelite soldiers to put broadsides into babies, right? So this is not some kind of a fringe view I'm advocating for being read into the text. And I think that at some point you have to say, okay, I could do this interpretation. I could start from this principle. I will not deviate from your 5 principles in the book. And I'm going to reinterpret this text to be consistent with those principles. Or you're going to look at this and say, this seems to add a lot of weight to the atheist argument that this is a bunch of stories from a primitive people that evolved over time. And it's just not true, right? And
So I assume that you're referring to William Lane Craig just now.
yes, I was.
Yeah, so I mean, his views, I think, have somewhat developed over the years. So of course, I talk in the book about genocide apologists and then just war interpreters. And it seems to me he was probably closer to a genocide apologist at one time, and then he was quite attracted to Paul Copan's work, it seems to me, and he migrated more to there. And so he's really emphasizes the idea of displacement of peoples as the primary argument. But I think, of course, that I argue in the book that those guys are really in a cognitive dissonance there, and that that does collapse back into genocide apologetics. Okay, but
sorry.
so you said, so Kubrick, you think, well, you don't think that they were, you don't think that all of those anomalies are intentional. Some of them are genuine continuity errors. Well, I mean, that's of course getting into the weeds a little bit, because the main point I'm making here is that if you have particular belief about the editor or the author or the director or the producer of the content and their skill, then you will at least be predisposed to not just to attribute it to error and to dismiss it and say it's unintentional, but rather to see something else going on there. And I certainly can give you abundant evidences for things that are going on in The Shining that are quite sophisticated in terms, for example, the manager of the hotel, his office shouldn't have a window to the outside. It's in the center of the hotel, but that was quite intentional. He has a window to the outside. And the point is that Kubrick wants to disorient the viewer, and in the film that there's a labyrinth outside, a hedge maze, and the hotel itself is a hedge maze. And so there's this hedge maze theme in the hotel itself, which is developed throughout the film. And that explains a lot of those continuity errors as an example. So I think that if you do give Kubrick the benefit of the doubt, you can explain most, if not all, of the alleged errors. And I would simply say the same thing about scripture. So that my point is, again, that I don't think that there is this neutral reader. And anyway, even if there were, it doesn't mean that they're right, because a neutral viewer of The Shining wouldn't necessarily be interpreting the film right if they didn't recognize that Kubrick was indeed the author when he was, or sorry, the director.
Okay. So I guess we're sort of at an impasse, and I just think that, how far do you take that thing? Well, there's no neutral way to interpret anything. Like, how do we weigh any kind of evidential setup for any kind of thing? Like, if I'm a Trump obsessed QAnon person, and I take the view that the January 6th insurrection was instigated by Antifa and BLM, and all of the Trump people who were there did nothing wrong, and Trump's going to be reinstated, and every time that the prediction of Q is falsified by Trump not being in office, well, that's just because Trump and Q are playing 4-dimensional chess that we can't possibly understand, and therefore it's going to happen, or he really has been the shadow president, but he's going to get reelected in 2024 to give himself a third term and that's when all the Democrat pedophiles who sacrifice children to get their blood and extend their lives is going to finally be exposed, and Q is vindicated, right? Like, all of that stuff, you can use your method with the presupposition that Q and Trump are so much smarter than the rest of us, and interpret all of the evidence of what we've seen in the last year to come to that conclusion. And I think the absurdity of that is a problem. And that gets back to the great pumpkin objection. I think it's a more contemporary version, so to speak.
There are, in some respects, of course, this really does go back to the parable of the invisible gardener, right, from the early 20th century. So that was a famous story that was originally told by John Wisdom, and then Antony Flew retold it in a collection of essays that was published in 1955 called Theology and Falsification. And so in it, he tells this story. Well, there was this two men were walking in the woods, and of course, I'm not telling this for your benefit, but for the viewer who doesn't know this parable. So two men are walking in the woods, and then they come upon a clearing, and one man says, well, the clearing is tended by a gardener, and the other man says, no, it's not. It's just a random forest clearing. So they both agree that they will sit and wait to see if a gardener shows up, and no gardener shows up. So then the first guy says, well, the gardener has been here, but he's invisible, and that's why we couldn't see him. So the second guy says, okay, let's set up an electric fence around the so-called garden and see if we can catch him that way. So they set up an electric fence and they wait, and no gardener appears. So then the first guy says, well, actually the gardener can pass through electric fences. And at some point, the second guy just throws up his hands and says, well, you can just modify that forever. And so the idea there is that Flew was making, and John Wisdom, I guess originally, was that you can endlessly modify quote unquote theological claims so that they never become falsifiable.
Or any metaphysical claim, yeah.
Or any metaphysical claim.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that you said any metaphysical claim, because of course naturalists do the same thing. So I actually wrote an essay in a popular philosophy journal, the name escapes me now. I think it was called Naturalism and the Invisible Gardener, or something to that effect, where I made the point about naturalism, that there was a time when naturalists were widely, generally they were like a sort of reductive physicalist. That was much more popular in the mid 20th century. So everything is matter and motion. And then they came to take a view, well, maybe there is some non-physical properties that arise, that consciousness arises out of the brain, but it's irreducible to the brain, but nonetheless is dependent upon the brain. It's epiphenomenal. And so then they modified what naturalism meant. And then more recently, people have modified it again. So for example, you'll find people saying naturalism is also consistent with Platonic universals, which are non-physical. So then you see that naturalism can endlessly be modified in the same way that the invisible gardener, it's just a naturalist gardener now. But I don't think that that's the fault of the naturalist. I think in each case, that is actually something we should be happy about, that when these different belief systems encounter prima facie disconfirming data, they revise their hypothesis of naturalism, or I revise the interpretation of the Bible, that each one of us is seeking to accommodate prima facie disconfirming data. And so I don't see any terrible relativism following from that.
So what's interesting about that, when I first deconverted, I go through my angry atheist phase. I want to be a natural. You leave from one thing, you want to go to the next. And over time, I see the truth of what you're saying, and you've stated it very nicely. Others have made a very similar point. I don't identify as a naturalist for basically that kind of reason. I have a lot of sympathies with naturalism and even physical reductionism, but I don't think I could ever prove that. I think it is ultimately unfalsifiable, like any other metaphysical position. And so I kind of want to take the agnostic, I don't know. When it comes to things like physicalism, what I like to do, especially say in philosophy of mind, I like to say that the physicalist view is not defeated. A lot of apologists like to pretend physicalism is dead, physicalism is not a serious view. And I like to say, well, no, actually, physicalism can be very well defended as still a viable model of what consciousness is. And I think you can respond to objections from qualia like Mary's room and that sort of thing, and still show, well, no, the physicalist view is still logically possible. It's possibly true, right? It's not ruled out, so to speak. But do I want to call myself a physicalist? No, I just couldn't prove it. I don't know what the ultimate ontology of reality is. I do think it's not theism, but then again, I kind of base that on my deep intuitive knowledge of what love is, right? I don't like to say the problem of evil. I actually almost like to say the problem of love, in terms of I know what it's like to be a loving father and what I would do if I had the power with my children, and how much more would a triomni loving God do with his children if we were like us? And so I would almost frame the problem of evil in that way. And I think that's the one thing that keeps me identifying as an atheist and not an agnostic, or a someone who's apathetic about the topic, I suppose. But yeah, so
as we wind down, I guess so. We're kind of honing in on some very deep epistemological divides for sure. Now, what you have said is sort of raised this problem of unfalsifiability with respect to metaphysics, but it's the same issue with respect to all our other beliefs too. Because you could have a sense perceptual belief, which could be falsified, and you could just revise that to explain why it was not in fact falsified. You could have a memorial belief, so a belief about you remember something happened yesterday, someone provides evidence that you were wrong. You could disconfirm that evidence through some ad hoc argument or something. And you could do that with all of our beliefs. So metaphysical beliefs are not somehow stand out problematic here. This issue is just a general aspect of the human condition. So does that lead you to take a general skepticism, not just about metaphysics, but about any truth at all?
I don't think so. I think there's a point that was raised. I think that's applicable here, is that eventually, once you study epistemology, you realize that you can't justify memorial beliefs or sense perception beliefs without referring to memory or sense perception, right? We're all kind of stuck in that thing. I think the best view that one can take in this sort of a problem, like you said, it is a problem. I kind of am very sympathetic to practicalism in a way, in terms of, practically speaking, my sense perception is generally reliable. I think my cognitive processes, in terms of the normal classical 3 laws of logic, is generally reliable. In fact, I've never seen anything that proves it, that defeats those things. They almost seem self-evident. So I don't think I have to be relative about truth. I do think you can't solve the problem of hard solipsism, right? I can't prove that other minds exist. I can't prove between idealism and a realist view of the external world, right? These are all classic metaphysical things. I think that ultimately you are forced into the Morian, I have hands, right? Look, here they are, one and the other, and I'm justified in this, right? And Plantinga's work takes that and applies it to God and then Christianity. And when he does this, he, I think, gets opened up to, when you open it up to all sorts of complex things, like going as far as Christian theism, I think you're going too far in terms of what you put into that properly basic or foundationalist view. And when he references things like defeaters, then you truly are opening up to things like QAnon or the Great Pumpkin being properly basic, or things like them could be. And I think that's something he wanted to avoid. And I think taking this view, like we've discussed here, which I think is correct, raises a problem for his epistemology that he wanted to avoid. Now, can he modify it and bring a more defensible view? Absolutely possible, but I just haven't seen it yet.
Well, I'm not familiar with practicalism as a philosophy, but it also sounded a little bit like you're being a pragmatist.
Sorry, yeah.
Okay, because there's practicalism, I think, in political philosophy. So I wasn't sure if it was another term, but yeah. So on the one hand, you could say you're a pragmatist because, for all you know, it seems like things are reliable. But pragmatism of that sort doesn't give you actual knowledge, right? It only says I'm going to act as if I have knowledge because that's all I can do. And so that's really quite a skeptical position still. So the other way would be for you actually to which I think I also hear you doing, kind of moving over to saying, well, maybe there are these properly basic beliefs. So all things being equal, I am justified in interpreting the world in terms of my sense perception as it self-presents, unless I have some reason to doubt it. I am justified in accepting my memory beliefs unless I have a reason to doubt them, etc. But if you are willing to go that far, I think we just have to have a conversation again, as we've already been having, about where do you draw the line as to, in principle, what kinds of beliefs can be admissible to having that prima facie status. But I think that we've certainly made some progress here, and I think that we've modeled some irenic conversation, and we've haven't gotten angry at each other or anybody else for that matter. And so hopefully others have stuck to the end and found benefit in this as well. So John, thanks a lot for the conversation.
Thank you very much. It was a very pleasant and good time. So it's always good. I haven't made an enemy with a video critique of you, so I'm happy.
All right, and again, people look John up online on Twitter, Counter Apologist with no T and as his Twitter handle, and then Counter Apologist. Just Google him, you'll find the blog as well and the YouTube channel. For
Christ's sakes, buy this man's book. It's like $7 on Amazon.
There you go. Yeah,
it's really good. He does good. He has good work. And I was shocked at how affordable the book was. So it's certainly worth the price of admission.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. All right. Take care.
You too.